I was checking through my calendar and I saw that you were our very last pre-COVID
yeah, exactly.
on campus.
I remember, it was 2019, correct? I mean,
it was January of 2020, and you came to Purdue, and
yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was January 2020. Right, you're absolutely right. Yeah, right before COVID. Yeah, right before
exactly.
COVID.
You were our very last pre-COVID pro seminar guest on campus before
Amazing,
before the pandemic forced us online with the pro seminar. So now you'll have your chance to get on YouTube with all the others.
Okay, that's great.
Well, you may recall that Gino joined us in January of 2020 in person for one of the very last of our pre-pandemic pro seminar events before the pandemic forced us to take this ritual online instead of in person. So let me introduce Gino. Gino is a professor of management and organizations at NYU's Stern School of Business. He earned his doctorate at my alma mater, Wharton, in 2004, about a decade after I did. He does research on technological innovation and competition, interfirm mobility, creativity, and social networks. He's won numerous awards, including the Best Doctoral Student Paper Award from the BPS division, what was then the BPS division of the Academy of Management. He's also won the Richard Nelson Award and was a finalist for the Organization Science Dissertation Proposal Competition. He won a big grant from the NSF on cognitive embeddedness of competition, has numerous publications. He pretty much owns Organization Science, I think, with 6 publications there. And he's, I think, placed an all-in bet on strategy science. With 4 publications there. He serves as associate editor for SMJ and senior editor for Organization Science and ICC, and is one of the co-founders of the Medici Summer School in Management Studies. So please join me in welcoming Gino Cattani.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So Gino, welcome back to the Pro Seminar, and you know, I love to start these interviews by asking people about how they got into this crazy profession we call strategy professor in the first place. I know that you studied accounting as an undergraduate, and you're actually a CPA. So what is a nice accountant like you doing in a crazy field like this?
Well, that's a good question. There is one answer that is more personal, which is I always wanted to be to pursue an academic career, and actually my original interest was in history, business history, and or economic history. And the problem was that I realized early on that it was very difficult to make a career by studying economic history, at least in Italy. And then I compromised. By choosing business administration at university as an undergraduate, because I thought studying economics and business in general would allow me to pursue my interest in economic history at some level, but also do something for which the prospects of pursuing an interesting career were much higher than by simply pursuing economic history. And in many ways that also transpires from my work. I mean, most of my studies, whether qualitative or quantitative, tend to be longitudinal, so they have a sort of historical lens. Some are clearly more historical than others. But then I also learned when I joined Wharton, then Jim March once said that in order to understand organizations, you need to study accounting. So in a way, although I didn't know that in advance, but confirmed that my choice was the right choice. Yeah.
So why does March say that? Why does he say that accounting is so important to understanding organizations? I'm curious.
Well, I think that is an interesting question. So I think it's for me, it was primarily referring to budgeting and control and planning, correct? And so in a way, if you study cost accounting in particular, and then you use that information also to plan your strategic actions, you are getting at the core of some important strategic decisions that managers make, regardless of what the impact on the balance sheet might be eventually. And actually, when I was for a while assistant professor in budgeting and control at Pisa University, I basically was teaching cost accounting. If you look at cost accounting, activity-based management, essentially you are getting at the core of strategic decisions, correct? And that information is also used by the management at multiple levels to make important strategic decisions. So when you study cost accounting, you understand how this is really at the core of what managers do, or at least of what managers use to make decisions. So I can see the close connection between accounting and the way organizations work, correct, and how managers make decisions. All these things are intimately interrelated, I guess.
Interesting. Okay. So you decided to study accounting, and so how did you wind up in the PhD program at Wharton?
Well, as I said, I wanted to pursue an academic career anyway. So after I graduated, I joined the PhD program at Pisa University, where I studied. What happened in my second year was that I had the opportunity to spend 1 year as a visiting fellow student at MIT, Sloan Management School, where I joined a program that was offered at that time that was called Visiting Fellow Program. And so I was a student. I could take classes for credit, and I thought that would be useful at some point, at some later point in time. I got to know there Ned Bowman, Edward Bowman, who was visiting MIT. He was on sabbatical that year, so I took in the spring semester his PhD seminar in corporate strategy, and I did very well in his class also because I was very interested in the topic, and we stay in touch. He promised to help me if I wanted to come back, go back to the United States, in other words. So
okay, so at that point you were planning to stay in Italy.
Yes, but then I went back to Italy. I finished I got my doctoral degree in Italy. I was for 1.5 years sort of assistant professor, was teaching cost accounting. But then I got increasingly dissatisfied with the academic system in Italy. I thought it was extremely conservative and not as meritocratic as I thought it would be. And so I decided to apply for the PhD program in the United States. That was the only way to come back and getting the training that unfortunately I hadn't gotten during my doctoral studies in Italy. So, and Ned Bowman was truly instrumental in getting, in making it happen, correct? I mean, I got accepted into the management program at Wharton, and that's how it all started, at least in the United States.
Yeah, Ned was really great. I remember taking his seminar as a first-year doctoral student and really enjoying it.
It was wonderful. He was a very direct man, very blunt. So he was telling me always the truth. I mean, and so for me, that was very important. It was not playing games. So it was actually, that's why I thought he was a person I could trust, and he actually meant it. So he meant it. So he helped me, and I been greatly in depth. I mean, I had to really even after years, when I think about him, because he died shortly after I arrived, the same semester, unfortunately. But every time I go back to Wharton, I pay tribute to him. There is a tree in the Wharton campus that was planted in his memory. This tree now has grown a lot over the past 24 years almost now. And I go there to pay a tribute to that tree because it's thanks to him that I was able to join Wharton and basically be where I am right now.
Yeah, he was a really great man. So what was your experience like in the doctoral program at Wharton?
Wharton was great. I mean, I think was an incredible experience, and it's kind of funny that interesting that you ask these questions, because it's an ongoing discussion with some of my fellow peers from the same program. We really missed that time immensely. I mean, we were lucky enough to be exposed to some of the best people in the field through intellectuals that really shaped the field at multiple levels.
Right.
And of course, it was a very competitive program, but I would say in a competitive, in a healthy way. So there were high standards, and people were motivated to live up to those expectations, to those standards. So, but I would say the general atmosphere at Wharton was truly stimulating. It was interdisciplinary, open to different ideas, no silos, and that for me was coming from Europe, and my education early in my life was in humanities, in humanities. So for me it was almost natural to think in a interdisciplinary way. So for me, Wharton was an incredible fit, and in many ways I still miss that atmosphere. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't have even at Stern a similar environment, but I think that, or other schools of course, but I can see the potential danger of creating silos where people only focus on the work of people in the same discipline and don't pay enough attention to what others do in other areas, and sometimes don't read each other. That is, for me, it's a danger. Okay, but at Wharton, that was not the case. People were very broad. They were also very respectful of ideas coming from other disciplines, and so for a PhD student, for me, that was an incredible environment. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I remember as a first-year student, we were required to take a very broad set of PhD seminars.
Yeah.
Strategy, org theory, and OB. I think we had to take 2 seminars in each.
Yeah.
And you know, it was a very broadening kind of educational experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen it both ways. I mean, for example, at Purdue, we have a very strategy specific focused, and I can see the trade-offs and the benefits of each. It does seem to me like the fields are getting increasingly specialized over time.
Yeah.
You know, and there is that temptation to go narrow and perhaps lose touch with some important ideas that are developed elsewhere. But
yeah,
you make a good point. So remind us a little bit about what your dissertation topic was, and tell us how did you find that particular topic?
Okay, so that was the tough part of the experience. I think what I can tell you is that I was trying to understand, to find out what a topic that could be interesting. Actually, my original intention, to be frank, was to study the genesis of resources and capabilities, and how they become, and how and why they become truly distinctive. The problem was, my approach, or at least my initial idea, was to study early stage firms and try to trace them out for some time and see what kind of decisions they were making, and so on and so forth. I realized that was a very risky project, and it was not entirely clear to me how I could address that question using a large sample study approach.
Right.
So I got a little bit discouraged, and then I decided to do an independent study with Sydney Winter, who actually eventually became my advisor, also because my goal was to work with him. After taking his PhD seminar, I got extremely interested in the way he was thinking, so I thought he was the right person to work with. But we actually, I put together a reading list on knowledge management in a very broad sense. And after a few meetings and tossing different ideas and discussing different papers, I got interested in one research question, very basic question, but that became eventually the core questions of my dissertation, trying to understand how established firms, incumbents, remain innovative repeatedly over time. Because the assumption is that incumbents becomes sometimes entrenched in what they're doing. They are unable to respond to innovations introduced by other firms from other industries, but sometimes even newly founded firms. But you also observe out there a lot of firms that have been innovative over time. And actually, at that time, because of the advent of the internet, Corning was under the radar. And then I didn't know about this company. I looked into that, a little bit into the history of this company, and turned out that this was an incredible example for the question that I was interested in, because Corning is one of the oldest companies in the United States, one of the oldest companies probably in the world, correct? Right. And so, and at that time, around 2000, 2 books were published on Corning to celebrate its 150 years of existence. And so as I was reading about Corning and then fiber optics, because that was when fiber optics, thanks to the internet, and the internet right. became particularly was a hot topic, if you wish. That is how everything started. Yeah. Because that was the right company to study, but then fiber optics I thought was an interesting technology to study, to explain how Corning was able to be so successful in that space. Actually, it was the company that developed the first optical glass fibers for long-distance telecommunication applications. That was providing us also an interesting example of how incumbents can be an engine of innovation, and not purely incremental innovations, but sometimes radical innovations for the market, correct? So that is how basically I ended up working on that context, that company, and addressing that question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's so many things you've given me to go with there. I'm not sure which direction to go first. Let me just maybe pause with Corning and maybe ask a little bit about why you chose Corning. Now, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that Corning is kind of an exemplar in terms of knowledge management, right? Yeah. In terms of their knowledge of the science of glass, basically, right? That they have run more experiments on different glass formulations than anybody else in the world, and they have this incredible archive of formulas and stuff like that. Was that part of your decision to focus on Corning?
Yes, it was. It was, and I think that the interesting thing for me was the fact that the company it established over the years joint ventures but they are sort of independent companies. What was interesting for me was to understand how this sort of internal organic growth over the years. And more importantly, this ongoing ability over time to introduce path-breaking technologies that sometimes led to the creation of entirely new markets. I mean, in a way that was, Corning is kind of similar to 3M, but 3M had been already studied by others. So I thought it's nice to focus on a company that at least on the academic side has not received enough attention. So at least I could bring to the table something new, correct? Not the usual suspect. Then, of course, as you pointed out, I mean, when I visited the company and I got to know some of the people there, I realized that there was much more there were much more data that I could analyze, and also the way the company was operating was, for me, an incredible illustration of some of the things that I was trying to study in my dissertation. And the other important aspect was that the company turned out to be much more willing to help me than I had anticipated. Especially when I got to know the former president of the company, Tom McAvoy, who was retired at that time, but because of his sort of academic background, PhD in chemistry, if I remember correctly, right, he was extremely willing and to work with me and help me getting even better access to some of the archives of the firm, and also put me in touch with, for instance, one of the key inventors of the first optical glass fibers, Donald Keck. So I mean, that was for me clearly a major opportunity, and the company, as I said, was more than happy to help me.
It's great to have an informant with that level of access who can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was almost a serendipitous meeting, because I was at a conference. I think it was at the technology conference at Wharton, if I remember correctly, and I met someone who was was a colleague of Tom McAvoy at Virginia University. Yes, because Tom McAvoy, after retiring, moved to Charlotte, I guess.
University of Virginia, right?
And he was teaching a class on history of glass. And so I reached out to him, and he was extremely kind. And then he was spending the summer in Corning Town, because his family still owned a house there. So I visited Corning when he was in Corning Town a few times during the summer, and he was more than happy to go back to the times in when he was a top manager and even president of Corning. So he opened several doors. Yeah.
So history of glass. So he became the business historian that you wanted to be, I guess, in some sense.
In a way, he was. The advantage of some of these companies that many people there have almost an academic background, whereas PhDs in physics, chemistry, or hard sciences in general, or master sciences degree, and therefore they kind of speak our language, correct? And so they are intellectually curious. They are more than happy to engage in academic discussion or conversation. So with those people, it's much easier to basically to talk about what you're doing. So at least that was my experience. Yeah.
That's great. So let me take you back to something you said earlier, which is you found something intriguing or attractive in the way that Sid Winter thinks.
Yeah.
When you were a student in his doctoral seminar, right? Yeah. So I never had the pleasure of taking a doctoral seminar from Sid Winter, because he was arriving just as I was finishing. Yeah. So I missed out on that opportunity. So maybe you can fill it in for me, because I didn't have that experience. What can you put a finger on specifying? You know, what was it about the way that he thinks that you found so attractive that you wanted him to become your mentor?
I think that probably two things in particular. One, first of all, the most obvious one, because in a way transpires also through my work, and at least my dissertation, was this evolutionary lens through which you study a particular phenomenon. And what Sid was emphasizing multiple times in our discussions during the seminar, but also when I conducted an independent study with him, was always adopting this dynamic perspective, try to understand a phenomenon in its unfolding, but over time, correct? So in a way, he has been always very sympathetic with an historical perspective, and given my interest in history, that was an obvious connection. And the evolutionary perspective is a very fluid perspective. So fluid in the sense that is by its very nature interdisciplinary, correct? So it's not narrow, it's actually more embracing. And that for me was the best way to think about complex phenomenon, like understanding how firms like Corning remain innovative over time. There is no one single aspect, correct? I mean, there might be many reasons why a firm remains innovative over time. So you have to understand the routines of these organizations. You have to understand, of course, the knowledge accumulated over time and the people involved, whether people turn over frequently or not. So for me, that was at some point after taking this class, almost like a natural intellectual connection. The other important thing is that I was impressed by the depth of his thinking. There are sometimes in academia two types of scholars, correct? Those who give you quick feedback, they have a quick answer to any question you raise, and they take pride in being quick because that means that they're fast, they think fast, and that is considered to be an indication of intelligence or brilliance, correct? Maybe true sometimes. I don't disagree with that. I mean, and I sometimes envy those people. But Sidney Winter struck me always as someone who thinks before answering, but thinks deeply, and doesn't provide quick answers. But when you have a conversation with him, every time you walk outside the door, you realize that you're seeing something from a different perspective, something that you never thought about before. So you may or may not agree with him all the times, but you really understand. You understand that how poor your understanding was of a particular problem or phenomenon. Now you go back and you sit at your desk and start thinking more. But at the end of the day, you realize that thanks to that conversation, you see things that you couldn't see before. So for me, that was as the kind of academic that was my, I mean, the
very
kind
thoughtful.
of the true academic, in my opinion. And that's why I thought it would have been fantastic to work with him if he's willing to accept me as a student. So in a way, I use the independent study as a seduction weapon, if you wish.
You got your foot in the door that way.
By the way, I mean, I don't think that at this point is just a funny anecdote, but if you allow me to share it with you, I think.
Please, I know the anecdote and it's wonderful, and I was going to ask you about it next. So
when we kind of agree on what to work, so in other words, like my research question, because at the beginning we were talking about the phenomenon, then you have to come up with a research question about that phenomenon. That's when you can really start working on something that has some meaning. So at that point, he was happy himself, and he said, Gino, I have to tell you something. If we are going to work from now on, and for several more months, possibly even years, I hope you don't offend it because I have to be very direct, but please change your deodorant. And at first, I was a little bit surprised because why should I? Anyway, so what I did, okay, I said, I will try to change my deodorant if you don't like it.
He didn't like the deodorant that you were using.
Yeah, he didn't like the deodorant. So basically, I went back to my cubicle. It was early morning in Italy, so probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I called my mom. I said, Mom, we need to, it's a matter of life and death. It's my future depends on a deodorant. And I said, please help me try to find out something that serves the purpose, but is not overwhelmingly strong in terms of scent, correct?
Yes.
And so my mother actually the next day called me and said, I have 2 options. Anyways, I said, please send me whatever you found. And she sent me 2 samples of 2 different types of deodorants. And then I tried one that I thought was okay. And then I went to the next meeting, Sid didn't tell me anything. I thought I could see that he was sniffing just to, and then after the 2 meetings, I asked explicitly, Sid, I hope you realize that I changed deodorant. I hope you are fine with that. He said, don't worry, it's okay now. So we continue our collaboration. It was pretty hilarious, I think.
And you still use that deodorant today, right?
Well, it's here, right next to. There
it is. Okay.
Eventually.
And it's not and I remember you telling me that you can't get it in the US. You have to have it imported.
Oh, I cannot find it. I don't understand. So actually, even now, when I go back to Italy, I buy many of them and I take them when I fly back. So sometimes if I forgot to do that, I ask my mom to send them.
So you could
must be the most expensive deodorants in the world, I think. Yeah.
You can make a side business of this, being a deodorant importer.
Yeah, I think including the transportation costs is for the most expensive deodorants you can find.
Especially these days with the price of international travel these days.
Absolutely,
very
absolutely. Excuse me.
Good. Okay. So what was, so you were doing this dissertation then,
yeah,
on how incumbents can best respond to innovative entrants, right?
Yeah.
Using Corning as your research site, and focusing specifically on, I guess, on fiber optics, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, what was the biggest obstacle or the biggest challenge? Maybe challenge is probably a better word. What was the biggest challenge in doing a dissertation on that topic?
There was the advantage. Let me start with the advantage was that that was a hot topic at that time, and not so much as had been written on, at least in management or in the innovation literature, if you wish, on that particular technology. And so that was an advantage because, but was also a disadvantage because not so much was written about it at that time. And so which sort of complicated things a little bit because I didn't have a clear compass, correct? And so I had to rely a lot on some insiders from the company to provide me also a clear sense of what patent classes, for instance, were relevant for fiber optics. Because at some point for the large sample study, I wanted to use patents as my key data, but I had to first identify patents, so in order to choose which patent classes or subclasses were relevant, I had to talk to experts from Corning, then also talk to some other people from a different company to double check whether the relevant patents had been extracted. That was clearly one challenge. The other challenge was that given the type of approach that I was using, I had to get information about all the patents cited by the focal patents, going backwards. Some of them were easily available through the USPTO. Others were only available in what is called image, so like photos of older patents, and I had to download them one by one. There were thousands of patents that I had to download and then use that information to basically extract for that part all the information that was relevant for my research. So I spent literally. And for one semester, I remember I didn't go to sleep for 2 days in a row, once per week. So because I was actually downloading from the USPTO at night when the traffic was much less, and I was less likely to be kicked out because I was downloading tons of patents. And that turned out to be physically quite demanding. Okay, so at least at that time, scraping was not really fashionable, or at least almost nobody.
So this was not automated in any way. You were doing.
No, it was not automated. I did it manually,
wow.
the old-fashioned way. I mean, probably it could have been done differently, but I didn't have the technical skills to do that, so I decided to do it manually. But I ended up one semester not going to bed for every week at least once. So. Wow. That was the physical part that was the challenging part of the.
Just to quantify this for us, how many patents are we talking about here that you did?
I think that overall, because I was using the focal patterns and look at what patterns they were citing. Sometimes, so I had several thousands patterns. So I think we're talking about anything about 10,000 patterns that I had to download. Each one of them, print them out, and then from those patterns get information and put that information into an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, it seems to be 10,000 is not a gigantic number, right? But if you download from the USPTO, at least at that time, some of these old documents, it was very slow. So I mean,
right.
And sometimes, as I said, I was even kicked out of the USPTO website because I was overusing it, correct? So then I realized that at night, early morning, the traffic was much less. So okay, it's better to stay up until the next morning and work a little bit better.
And I would think that it's not so much the downloading the patents that's so labor intensive as the reading of the patents. So
yeah,
you've actually
reading,
read
it was
10,000 patents.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, for me was a very important. That was also what Sid always told me. So you have to collect your data. So, but I remember I was really impressed and still resonates with me by a talk at Wharton delivered by Steve Klepper, and was already at that time very famous, of course. But what really impressed me, apart from the quality of his work, was the fact that this guy I knew, and he told me, always collected, because unfortunately he passed away, but collected data by himself. So was rarely relying on an array collecting data for him. He was literally spending days in a library collecting from whatever source the data he needed for his work. And I think that gave him a lot of credibility and understanding of the data, correct? Not to mention the data generation process. So I think that for me, that was very important. If someone at that level does it, and I have to do it myself, correct? Because sometimes what I see also among some of our PhD students, even at Stern, is they ask others to collect the data for them. I understand if you need a specific type of, I mean, some skills to download data or do some scraping that you don't have, but you shouldn't rely too much on others when it comes to the data that you're supposed to use in your dissertation, correct? Because at least I got to know what data I was using and how reliable they were, correct? Because I inputted them manually from the beginning. But and that for me is still important. But sometimes people prefer to use shortcuts, correct? And I don't know that I don't think that that's the right approach, especially for your dissertation.
Right, that makes sense. So, great. So tell us a little bit about how your research has progressed since your dissertation.
Yeah.
How has your research developed? What's been the trajectory, and what has motivated your choices of research topics and along the way?
That's a great question. I think that one way, if you want, I mean, my dissertation was part of the research trajectory that deals, at least my research trajectory that deals more with what generates novelty, if you wish, whether it's at individual or organizational level. What became increasingly obvious to me through interactions with my colleague and co-author and friend Simone Ferriani, who actually was visiting Wharton during my last year, and also after reading the paper by Elsa Zuckerman, the 99 paper in AJS on the categorical imperative, was that it's important to look not only at the supply side, but also the receiving hand. So when we talk about innovation, of course, we're primarily interested, at least as strategy scholars, innovation scholars, in what explains or might be generating novelty. But what it's also important to understand here, what are the audiences that eventually evaluate this novelty. And I'm not only talking about markets or the users, but I'm also talking about peers, critics, social media, or rating platforms. And so that is in a way more the demand side, correct? And in many ways, this that is why one trajectory of my research deals with social evaluation, broadly speaking. Okay, and that has been started towards the end of my PhD program at Wharton. So at least I had the first conversation on that aspect of innovation, that side of innovation, towards the end of my PhD program, and over the years has become more relevant in my work. So I think that these two are, in a way, I like to think that they're two sides of the same coin, because right. And I try to go back and forth, and for instance, I mean, I published recently a book with another scholar, where we have also some contribution from other colleagues, but that book is almost going back to the origins of my work. I mean, it's largely evolutionary in perspective, but at the same time, I continue working on the other side of the phenomenon, but which is more focused on the social evaluation aspect. So it's going back and forth, and precisely because, in my opinion, they are two sides of the same coin. I sometimes, when I go back to the other original stream of research, I understand it better, right? Because I'm also thinking about the other side. They inform each other. So I think that largely your work evolves depending on the people you are working with, or you deliberately try to interact with, correct? And I like working with other people, especially if people are open-minded, and so that clearly has had a very important influence in my trajectory, if you wish. But I think these are the two main trajectories that I have followed over time. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question at that intersection of innovation and social evaluation, right? So there's a body of research there. What's the most important unanswered questions about that intersection of social evaluation and innovation? What do we not know about the relationship between innovation and social evaluation that we really should know by now?
Well, I think that that's a great question. I don't even know whether I have the right answer to that question. But I like to think that, and that has become for me more obvious when I concentrated in cultural industries, for instance, or what others call creative industries, is that you don't fully understand the dynamic of these industries, not only at the individual, but also at the organizational level, if you don't account for the relevance of different type of audiences that are critical to understand innovation or creativity or innovation in those industries. I'm referring to peers, I'm referring to critics, and increasingly rating platforms, and many studies on technology, for instance, some of these actors are not always discussed or taken into account. But in many, even traditional industries, I mean, they are becoming extremely important, correct? I mean, if you look at the role of rating platforms, I mean, they are becoming almost ubiquitous, correct? And they are kind of, or you can think about even in general with digitization, how some of the traditional gatekeepers are no longer as influential as they used to be, correct? I mean, if you look at the publishing industry, or for instance, you realize that like self-publishing is in different forms is becoming I wouldn't say dominant, but clearly an important phenomenon, and which means that some of the traditional gatekeepers, like publishing companies, are losing ground, or if they want to take advantage of some of these changes and perceive them not as threats but as opportunities, they have to really change their strategy. So the point is that when you start thinking about social evaluation and who are the actors who are evaluating, besides and beyond the traditional users or consumers, you see, first of all, the complexity of the phenomenon that we are studying, but also the importance of accounting for some of these other actors that typically are not included in our analysis, that are really shaping important decisions, correct? Or shape how even firms think about innovation, or even, and then also the evolution of particular industries. So that's what I think is the way I think I can answer your question. But if you want, I can try to be a little bit more specific. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. I think that's pretty clear. So we only have just a few minutes left. So let me close with one last question. I noticed that you have served on the dissertation committees of about a dozen doctoral students and have chaired maybe a few of those. So you've had some good amount of opportunity to mentor doctoral students.
Yeah.
In that experience, what is the most important piece of advice that you give to your own doctoral students that you work with?
I think in many ways is the advice that Sidney Winter gave me, because I thought that was a great piece of advice. And essentially, there are two pieces, if you wish. One, that you have to enjoy the process. And it seems to be an obvious thing to say, but is incredibly true. You have to enjoy the process of doing research. So if you don't enjoy the process, you just focus on the outcome, although the outcome obviously is very important, but if you don't enjoy the process, I mean, you are not, you are setting yourself for troubles, correct? Because then you get easily discouraged from digging deeper into something because you don't see immediate results. And also you prevent yourself from deepening what you're doing, correct? Because you're always distracted by, oh, I need to achieve that result, okay, or deliver something. So I think and that is also true when you write papers eventually, correct? I think if you're always, the only target is to publish, which at the end of the day, it is for anybody, but you don't enjoy the process. I mean, publishing a paper becomes a nightmare, right? Because then how you frame a rejection is an obstacle to achieve that goal. But if you like the process, you know that that is part of the game. But right. At least, so for me, that was an important. The other thing is that, which is very practical. I mean, if you really want to do something deep, I think that it's very wrong to assume that the quicker you finish your dissertation, the smarter you are, correct? I mean, I think a lot of people think that if you finish the PhD program in 4 years instead of 6, you are smart, and that is deadly that wrong, in the sense that if you do something really deep, I mean, it may take longer, correct? And especially if you study something that nobody has studied or only a few have studied, you face challenges, but that could pay off much more later on, correct? So I don't really understand why some students are always always in a rush, correct? I mean, as if there are some. So I think you need to take the time that it takes to address that question. And if the question is complex, novel, and interesting, it may take longer, correct? So I think that should be, it's not that you are less smart if you finish in 5 or 6 years instead of 4, correct? I mean, it seems to be obvious to say, but it's striking to see how sometimes students think the opposite way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And finally, which goes back to what we discussed at the very beginning, I think that it worked really well for me. Even when I was done with my coursework, sometimes I audited classes when I was working on my dissertation from other departments. for instance, in biology, I audited 2 classes because I was interested in evolutionary biology. And once you are free to choose whatever class or audit whatever class you want, I mean, I think it's a good advice to sit in those classes and see other things that otherwise you're not able to see. Okay, if you simply stay in your cubicle or whatever. Yeah.
Right, and I think that the underlying theme under all 3 of those pieces of advice is do it right, don't do it quickly. Right?
Yeah.
It's better to do it right than to do it quickly. And I think you exemplify that. Even in something as basic as your willingness to go back and get a second PhD, to take your time and make sure you're doing it right. And so I think that's
actually Dan Lemitel once told me, he was one of my committee members, but not a super smart man, as we know. But he told me once, when something is published forever. So think about it. So yeah. In other words, I mean, be careful. Maybe it's better to invest extra time to make sure that everything is correct and done properly or the right way, at least to the best of your capabilities. Because when it's published, you can't say that you didn't write it, correct? I mean, it's published and it's published forever. Then it will sticks with you for forever, right? So I mean, that is, I thought it was an incredible piece of obvious thing to say, but it's not that obvious, right?
Right.
But by the way, once actually I used that advice literally. I had the easiest revision ever with a paper in AMJ. With my co-author, we knew that there was some problem in our paper that the reviewers didn't detect. So, and I was assistant professor. And then we decided to change completely the paper and do it the right way. Obviously, the reviewer said, this is another paper, we cannot, so they rejected it. We published the paper in another good journal, but at least we are very proud of that paper. And we keep saying, even after several years, what a great decision that was, because it would have been a mistake to get a paper in a top journal right away, but then not be proud or even probably embarrassed to have that paper published.
Right. Right. Very wise decision.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And let me ask everybody to join me in thanking you for participating in our celebrity talk show interview ritual. Thank you very much, Gino.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Very nice of you. Thank you.